It was during the summer holidays in 1966 in a small town in the 𝗃𝗏𝗏 in Germany. I was about 7 years old, and back then it was not very common for us to go on vacation, so most of the kids in my area had to fend for themselves. It was the period of the baby boomers. There were many children and therefore no boredom. That was nice on the one hand, but in my case there were also dramatic events. In the place where I lived, two groups formed among the children. One was the gang of Oberndorf, a fearsome troop intent only on destruction and brutality. The other group, to which I belonged, also did some bad things, and we provoked the other group, but we were much more moderate. Then at some point the Oberndorf gang challenged us and set a date for a brawl. The Oberndorf gang meant it very seriously and apparently had really brutal intentions. I arrived punctually at the agreed upon place and had to realize that I, a paragon of discipline, was the first of my group to arrive. I was alone and was immediately surrounded by the opposing group. Their leader, a boy named Richard, about 4 or 5 years older, stepped up to me, swung wordlessly, and his fist hit my upper stomach with full force. I felt a lightning-sharp pain in my chest and it immediately went dark. I was not unconscious, but consciously experiencing an oppressive darkness. Suddenly this darkness vanished like a curtain and I went from horizontal to vertical without consciously wanting it. I thought at first that someone had helped me get up, but I couldn't see anyone next to me. I felt great and this surprised me, because I still remembered Richard's violent punch. I was proud that I took the hit so well. But then I realized that I was about 50 meters away from where I got the punch. I wondered how I got there and why I was all alone. I was in a place where the road had been dug up for renovation work. The builders were probably on their lunch break at the time. Then I also realized that I felt lighter than ever before, as if gravity had been lifted. The acoustics were different, too. I could hear something, but the birdsong sounded different, a little more muffled. I could hardly hear the trees rustling in the wind. Then I looked around to see if one of my buddies was crouching somewhere behind a bush watching me, or even Richard and his gang. I turned my head left, then right, and just as I was about to turn around, I telepathically heard a male voice say, "Don't turn around." Since I had to assume that this was the voice of the one who had helped me to my feet, I naturally wanted to know who this ominous voice belonged to. Apparently, the stranger recognized my intention and said again, "Don't turn around." But since my curiosity at the time easily overcame all law-like restrictions, I turned around despite the 2 warnings and immediately saw my body lying about 4 meters behind me, across the bend on the uneven ground. There was no doubt that my lifeless, physical body lay there. I recognized my threadbare leather pants, plaid knee-high socks, and sandals where my right pinky toe always stuck out. My face looked oddly gray and my tongue was hanging out of my open mouth. The eyes were wide and staring motionless at the blue sky. The voice that had warned me not to turn around no longer answered, not a reprimand for not listening, nor any other sound. I later learned from a doctor that such a blow could have been fatal, as there was a backlog of blood in the aorta which, if I remember correctly, could have caused cardiac arrest. It made sense to me that after the hit, the children involved feared I was dead, then took me off down the dirt road onto the construction road, possibly hoping I would be run over by one of the construction vehicles to cover up their crime. But that's just a guess. Anyway, I was out of my physical body, turning around again, startled, trying to figure out my current situation when my body suddenly started to move. I was lifted and pushed gently towards the road sign at the edge of the forest. Of course I didn't want to go there. I wanted to go past the last house on the right, past the hunter's fence and into the adjacent forest to visit the abandoned bivouac of the American soldiers and look for peanut butter tubes, crisp bread, etc. Unfortunately, I could not change the direction I had taken. Although I no longer had a physical body, I could see my legs kicking as I wanted to move somewhere else. Then I thought to myself, it doesn't matter, then, just go along the road to the neighboring town, which I already knew from visiting relatives with my grandmother. But my body didn't go there, either, but rather past the place name sign on the right, then continued steeply up over the treetops. About 2 meters above the trees I hovered over the forest, my head pointing in the direction of flight. I saw trees that I knew and used to climb, I saw country lanes and birds perched on the tops of fir trees, but they obviously didn't see me, otherwise they would have flown up. Finally, I came to the edge of the forest that bordered the neighboring village and stopped slowly. I saw the last trees in the forest below me and the adjoining dirt road as I slowly went back to a horizontal position. I continued to hover above the trees, saw the houses of the neighboring town, the road leading into the forest, and then suddenly a bright, rectangular something appeared right in front of me. Today one would say that it looked like a panorama window or a cinema screen in 16:9 cinema format. A blazing golden light shone out of the window, completely enveloping me without being in any way uncomfortable. It didn't glare and didn't radiate heat. In this window I now noticed 3 beings, 1 on the left, 2 on the right. They were shaped like humans, but I couldn't estimate or even approximate their size. Details such as face and hands could not be made out. This was perhaps due to the bright light that they also emitted themselves. One of the 2 on the right edge stood upright, the other 2 were seated. Suddenly the one on the left became aware of me and seemed surprised by my presence, and quickly rushed to the others. After they had a short discussion it seemed it got dark around me again, and I immediately woke up lying on my back where the road curved, with burning pains in my head, neck and limbs. I was terribly thirsty, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth and I gasped for air in panic. My vision was impaired, blurry for a while, but this returned to normal after a few hours. I scrambled to my feet and dragged myself home in severe pain, spending a few days in bed voluntarily. About 2 weeks after the events, Richard apologized to my parents for his action. That settled the matter for my parents, but not for me. I suffered miserably from the effects of the punch for a long time. I could hardly sleep, had stomach pains and became sensitive to noise and light. Over time I developed a strong hatred for Richard because of my health problems. That hate exploded one afternoon the following winter. A large number of children were sledding at a cattle pasture when I saw that hated Richard wanting to use his sled as well. I stood a little apart by a wooden hut to observe, because I wanted to avoid Richard. I watched some of Richard's rides, my hatred for him growing by the minute. My fists clenched, teeth ground, and my eyes narrowed. My blood was pounding in my head and I sent all my hate to Richard like a cannon shot. Then it happened. Richard's sled suddenly went off the track and landed at full speed in the barbed wire fence of the cattle pasture, where the left side of his face was torn open by the barbed wire. It was a terrifying sight that I will not forget. After a brief hospital stay, Richard retained 5 long scars on his face. I then thought for a long time about whether my extreme hatred at the time was actually the trigger for the accident. This suspicion was confirmed a short time later. There were some arguments and problems with my class teacher, triggered by my lack of concentration due to the lack of sleep I mentioned. One Saturday afternoon after school, my father asked me about the state of things between me and my teacher. There was that hate and anger again, creeping up on my entire body and finally concentrating in my head. I could hear my blood pounding in my head and my heart pounding in my throat as I squeezed out, fists clenched, I wish she'd fall down the stairs and break her leg, then I'd have peace with her for the first time. The next Monday morning, A young teacher came into the class and announced that she would stand in for our class teacher for the next few weeks, as Mrs. Wilhelm had a tragic accident on Saturday afternoon, in which she fell down the stairs and broke both her legs. I was shocked and had the confirmation that I can harm others through my anger. I was devastated. My bad conscience immediately settled in the back of my mind for a long time, and I began to think about how I could take the nourishment away from this bad conscience in the future. From then on I kept my distance from people. Unfortunately, there were other incidents related to my anger later on, albeit not as drastic as before. My conclusion is that thoughts can do bad or good, especially when emotions are involved. Hate and anger have been under control for a long time now, and should they flare up again, I know what to do. I'm not very religious, but through my near-death experience I absolutely believe that life goes on after physical death.